Are you looking for an easy way to use Instax Wide with an off-camera flash? I'll show you how today on PolaStax. We're going to talk about several ways to use electronic flash with a Polaroid land camera that's fitted with the PolaStax Instax Wide film holder. Now, why are we putting a PolaStax Instax Wide film holder in a Polaroid land camera, you ask? Because when you put Instax Wide in a Polaroid land camera, you get manual focus, a choice of apertures, and in many cases, a glass lens. Yes, that's right, not a plastic lens, a glass lens, and not a toy viewfinder, a real, live glass viewfinder that is easy to use and it works great. Now, before we get too deep into this, I do need to ask you a favor. You know what's coming. You've heard it before. You get tired of hearing it. But I have to say it. Please like and subscribe. This is a brand new channel. I am doing the best I can to get the word out there because I want to share this with everyone. I think anyone who loves Instax or instant film is going to be overjoyed to find out that you can actually get more out of Instax if you put it in a Polaroid land camera. Now, there are a few things you have to know beforehand to make it work. That's why I have these videos up, and I have a number of them. So if you haven't watched the earlier videos, please do that. Some of the earliest videos have terrible audio quality. I've remedied that situation. I apologize in advance for the bad audio quality in the earlier videos. However, here we are in this video. Take a moment, like and subscribe. It's going to help me out, and you're going to help other people find out about the PolaStax Instax Wide film holder and what they can do with it. So, without further ado, what kinds of flash options do you have with a Polaroid land camera? All right, let's start not with the modern electronic flash, but let's go back just a little bit. And we're going to pull this model up here. This is a Polaroid 250 land camera. Now, this also has a glass lens. Great camera. What this does not have is X-Sync. Now, what is X-Sync? X-Sync stands for electronic sync. If you know something about the history of film cameras, then you know that for a long time, there was no such thing as X-Sync. What you had was M-Sync. So when you have a film camera and you see these two settings on the front of the camera, M and X, one of those is for flash bulbs. That's the M setting. And one of them is for electronic flash. That's the X setting. Now this gets a little complicated, but just to boil it down to its essence. When you are setting off a flash bulb, you are igniting a chemical reaction that takes a certain amount of time, but is also unpredictable. So those cameras were basically built in such a way that they're going to start capturing whatever the image is after the bulb is ignited. Because if it started before, then you're going to have an issue with not actually getting the light, right? Now, X-Sync works a little differently. Shutter is going to open first, flash fires, and the shutter closes quickly. So what do these bulbs look like? Well, I think I have some here and here. Now, you can still get these on eBay. For the most part, these should still work. If you want the old-fashioned Polaroid look, you know, of those old flashes, the old bulbs, you can still get these. This is the 268 flash gun, and it's really simple. It uses one AA battery. A lot of times the contacts in these are corroded, so obviously if you're buying stuff secondhand, you do want to check to make sure that it's not corroded, because if it's corroded, you're not going to be able to use it. But if the contacts are not corroded, if a battery has not been left in here for 30 years, then you're good to go. Then you just have to find some of these flash bulbs. You pop one in. One caveat, if you're going to use something like this, please be sure that this cover is intact. So these bulbs can shatter. They're actually coated, they're glass, but they're coated in plastic to prevent shattering. But that doesn't mean that some of them don't shatter occasionally, and that's what this protective cover is for, and it's blue tinted to correct for Polacolor, basically. So these still work if the contacts are good and if you can find the bulbs. Now the problem with these, obviously, is they sit on the camera, and they're that old-timey flashbulb look. If that's what you want, if you're trying to go for a retro look, then by all means do that. But if you're like, I don't think so. I don't want my Instax wide shots that I have in this camera that's, tricked out to look like they were shot in the 1960s. Then you want to use electronic flash. Now, how do you do that? All right, let's start with the non-400 series cameras. So every camera that is not a 400 series camera just has M-Sync. There's no electronic sync. There's no X-Sync. Now, if you don't have one here, oh, actually I do have one here. I have one right here. You can see this is the plug. There's a little difference. I hope you can see that. So a little difference between this plug and this simple PC socket plug. And the difference is there's a small metal tab adjacent to the PC socket part of this. And this tab pushes apart a contact inside the shutter. What's interesting about this, and there's a little bit of debate out there of how this works. Some people have one opinion, some people have another opinion. So I'm just kind of going to go down the middle of the road here. But essentially, you don't need that tab for any non-400 series camera. So if you have a 100, if you have a Polaroid 104, 250, all you need to set off a flash is this PC socket adapter. And it plugs in right there on the side of the shutter. So you're saying, okay, well, I'm a little confused. You said that this doesn't have X-Sync, but we can still use a flash? That's right, you can. What happens is the shutter in this camera is going to stay open until the light meter sees enough light. So you have a flash here or wherever. You trip the shutter, and then the flash is going to trigger. But if the camera's light meter does not think there's enough light to complete the exposure, then it will leave the shutter open. Now that actually is kind of cool because it means that you can do special effects, you can drag the shutter, you could, do all sorts of cool stuff. But it can be problematic if you're trying to do portraits or if you're trying to take pictures of people, you don't want them to move around. So how does it actually work, and how do you put it to use? So I'm going to use an off-camera flash adapter. This is what model is this? I forgot now. This is made for Olympus. This is the X Pro O. And I'm going to turn on the flash. Now these are already synced together, so you can see that's on. So we just test the flash. Flash works. I'm going to put this into an adapter that we sell at PolaStax. What this is, simply put, is the metal parts from a 268 flash gun, and then 3D printed parts attached to an impact hot shoe with the PC cord. Okay? I'm going to explain the settings in just a second. I just want you to see that this works. So I've cocked the shutter, and there we go. Now, did you notice how long that shutter was? I hope you heard that. You should be able to hear it with this mic. Let me do it one more time. These don't always like to be this close together, but here we go. Oh, that time it was on because I left my finger on the button. So what's happening is the light meter is saying to the shutter, oh, there's not enough light. So even with the flash, there's not enough light. So it's leaving that flash open. Now when you take your finger off the button, then the shutter is going to close. Is this a reliable way of using flash? Is it an exact way? No, it's not. There are equations where you can actually figure out the power, and I'm not going to go into that today. There are so many web pages out there. It's not hard to figure out if you want to do that. But let me just kind of give you an idea of what you need to do in order to even get to a point where you can have an exposure that looks decent. The first thing you need to do is you need to make sure that the setting of the camera, this is for Polaroid lens cameras every kind, is on the cloudy or indoor setting. That is necessary. You also need to make sure, if you're using the 268 flash gun with a flash bulb, or your modern electronic flash, that you use the 75 ISO setting. Now, when you shoot Instax Wide in a camera that had a 3000 ISO and an ISO 75 setting, you have to make some adjustments. When you're on the 3000 setting, you use the light meter cap that reduces the light going into the light meter by 2 stops. When you're on the 75 ISO setting, you're going to put a 3-stop ND filter over the lens. Now, the cameras that we sell at PolaStax are good to go on this. They're Instax ready. They come with the filter adapter. You just pop the filter in. But if you have your own Polaroid pack film camera that you're converting to use Instax, and you want to use it with the PolaStax Instax Wide film holders, you just need to get this adapter, and it's not expensive. It just slips on or slips off. One thing about the adapter, if you're going to use the Polaroid portrait kit, which changes the focal distance so you can do head and shoulder portraits, make sure you get the high profile adapter, not the low profile. This is the low profile, okay? The portrait and close-up kits will not work with the low profile filter adapter. Just remember that. All right, so in this case, this is good to go. I could take a picture with that flash gun and a flash bulb, or I could take a picture with this flash, and I could even put it on the on this and use it on camera. Again, a little tricky, like knowing exactly what the power of the flash should be. If you are, let's see if I have that. Oh, here it is. If you are so inclined, you could buy a flash meter. I've had this forever. This is probably one of my most valuable pieces of photographic equipment. This is a Conic L308B light meter and flash meter combo. Just perfect. There's not too many features, but they're just enough. And it's really simple and straightforward to use. I love it. So it's totally possible to hook up your whatever. You can hook up your flash directly or your wireless to the flash meter and then take a measurement beforehand, right? And then figure out your power that way. That's the way I would usually do it. The problem is you're still dealing with the fact that this doesn't have X-Sync. So how do we remedy that? Well, there is a solution. If you are lucky enough to own a Polaroid 450, then you're all set. You just need to convert it to PolaStax. And I have a video that shows how you can do that in 5 minutes or less. It's a very quick, easy thing to do. You're not doing much to the camera at all, honestly. So this 450 has been around the block a few times. I've used this with electronic flash, and I've tinkered with the shutter quite a bit. Let me just explain that real quickly. So there's an interesting thing with these cameras that not a lot of people know, and that is that the light meters can be recalibrated. You're going to see people in various places that are like, oh, those light meters don't work, they're too old, or the CDS photocells, they're not going to read properly. In some cases they're right, and in some cases they're wrong. It's really not that simple. It's more a matter not so much of the CDS photocell and these as the capacitors. These capacitors are very old and they're less reliable than the photocell. So a lot of times when the light meter doesn't work as well as it should, or not working at all, and I've only come across a few where the light meter really didn't work, it's often the capacitors. So because of that, there are ways that you can change the settings in the shutter and actually recalibrate this. I wouldn't recommend it. It's not for anybody, but it can be done. Here's the interesting thing that I learned, and I'm not sure if anyone else has documented this yet. So with the 400 series cameras, when you do this recalibration, as you recalibrate, you're not just changing how sensitive the light meter is, you're also changing the X-Sync shutter speed. And that's unusual because most of the time in film cameras, the X-Sync shutter speed is determined basically with a different circuit or spring or mechanism or whatever. It's very rare, as far as I know, to be able to change the X-Sync shutter speed in camera, but you can. So in this one, what I did, and I didn't realize what I was doing it at the time, once I discovered it, I was like, oh, that's really cool, is that I actually changed, when I did this recalibration, the X-Sync went from 1/30th or 1/50th, which is about what it should be, to 1/200th on the 3000 ISO setting. So what that meant is that by putting this on ISO 3000 and having, because it's a fixed shutter speed, I don't need to worry about, I got to put this over the light meter, I got to put this over the lens, because then I can do the calculations exactly. I'll explain what I mean by that in just a second. So I actually had this working at 1/200th of a second at the X-Sync shutter speed. 1/200th is awesome, and that's a modern, right? That's what modern cameras use. But then when I realized, oh, that's because I recalibrated light meter, I started playing with it again, and then got down to brass tacks and said, okay, well, what should this really be? So I dialed it back to what is the closer thing. I think this one is now set at, it's at 1/30th or 1/40th. So the older cameras obviously had a slower X-Sync speed than today's cameras. The average was 1/60th for most of the cameras. And that's about what these are. I've measured several with the shutter tester. Some of them are 1/30th, some of them are 1/50th. So between 1/30th and 1/60th, that's a little bit of variation, but it's not huge. So it's not too bad. All right, so what do you need in order to make this work on a 400 model camera? And this will also work, by the way, in the 420, the 430, and the 440. Those aren't quite as nice as the 450. You don't have the integrated rangefinder viewfinder with parallax correction that you have in the 450. But the cool thing is that they do have X-Sync, and there's a ton of cameras out there, believe it or not, that do. And so I think that's something we should take advantage of. All right, so let's see if this is, oh great, what's going on with my battery? We're having technical difficulties, folks. It's funny, I'm dealing with cameras that are 50 and 60 years old, and oftentimes I find they are more reliable than things like this wireless. All right, now it's decided to come back on. Sometimes this thing goes to sleep and then it doesn't reactivate. I'm not sure why. So I'm not firing the shutter yet. This is just a test to make sure these are still connected. They are. Yay. So what's the difference with this adapter? So this adapter, same principle. We have a special 3D printed holder that's connected to an impact hot shoe that has had a simple PC socket cable connection. I've spliced in the cable from a 268 flash gun. Why did I have to do that? Well, you have to do that to use the X-Sync. You need that little tab that pushes apart these contacts in the shutter. Once you do that, it works great. So for instance, got the shutter, it's good to go. Now, you notice the difference that time? I hope you heard that. Let's do it closer to the mic so you can hear it. This is a traditional X-Sync shutter speed, and works like a charm. Now, what do I have on the front of this? This is that portrait kit I was talking about. These are really cool. They're a little fiddly, but it's cool that you can pop this on the front and do head and shoulders portraits. The only part that's a little bit annoying is you also need the adapter that goes on top of the viewfinder, because when you change the focal distance for the lens, you have to do the same thing for the viewfinder. Remember, this is not an SLR, right? This has a rangefinder in it. Now, in practice, they work fine once you get used to it. If you haven't done it before, they take a little getting used to, but really not too difficult. So what can you do with this? Well, let me show you some examples of what you can do with it right now. I'm going to set this to the side. And you may have already noticed these. This is from a recent photo shoot. I'm just going to show you. First, I'm going to show you, this is the camera itself. This is the 450. with no flash. This is just the recalibrated camera with its own meter and available light. Okay, and that's with the portrait kit. Okay, so no flash, and then here we have one. This one's with flash. Now, I didn't have the perfect setup. This was a one flash setup, which I generally, it's not my preferred. As I said, it would have been great to have two, but I was in a hurry and we had a limited amount of time to shoot. So if you noticed, there's a lot of contrast here. The background is dark. This was shot in daylight. And what I did was, because I have the ability to put filters over the lens, I reduced the amount of light going into the camera in order to darken the background. So this is what I was going to talk about just a second ago. When you're doing portraits or any kind of flash photography and you're using a modern electronic flash with a camera that has X-Sync, but you cannot change the f-stop on your camera, you can't really change the aperture setting, what do you have to do? Well, then you have to figure out how to reduce the amount of light going in if you cannot shoot it at the available settings. What are the available settings? If you have 800 ISO film in the camera and the lens is an f8.8 lens wide open, which is the cloudy setting, is f8.8, and the shutter speed at X-Sync speed is 1/30th, or we'll say 1/30th because that just makes it easier. Then with your flash meter, you can figure out, okay, what do I need to do? If you don't have a flash meter, you are going to need those calculations, those equations, to actually figure out the amount of power that the flash needs to be sending out. That does make it a little harder. That's why I said, if you have a flash meter, you're good to go. If you don't, you might want to think about getting one because it just makes it so much easier. You're going to put the flash meter in front of your subject. If you've done portrait photography, you already know about this, but you put the flash meter in front of the subject's chin, take a reading. It's not hard. It's actually quite easy to do. So in this case, rather than just shooting it straight, which I could have done by altering the flash power, I pumped up the flash and then reduced the amount of light that was going into the camera itself. I think I used a 2-stop ND, so that I had the portrait accessory over the lens and then the high profile filter adapter and then ND, a 2-stop in that. And that's how I achieved that. Here's another one where I did just a 1-stop instead of the 2. These turned out great. I'm really happy with how they turned out. And the biggest issue was just, as it usually is figuring out where the flash needs to be and the power settings. And once we had that nailed down, the rest of it was quite easy. So that about covers it for today. I wanted to get through this as quickly as possible because I noticed I'm making these half-hour videos and they're a little long for me to even go through. So if you have questions, if I went through it a little too fast, please don't hesitate to ask in the comments. I'll do my best to answer them. Remember, I really do need you to like and subscribe. So if you didn't do it at the beginning of the video, please do it now because it makes such a huge difference. You liking and subscribing helps more people find out about this, and that's my goal. That's really what I want to do. I want more and more people to be able to go out and do stuff like what I just showed you, taking portraits with a 60-year-old camera and using a modern flash, an Instax Wide. I mean, how cool is that, right? Okay, so that's all for today. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you soon.